Chapter 361. A Message from Ackland Pass. The next morning, in the guest mansion of House Jimena, Alaric received a letter from Redden via messenger pigeon. So there were remnants from Haroun hiding within our midst all this time. His expression darkened as he read the contents. Redden mentioned that all their warriors were safe, which made him feel better. After reading the letter, he put it down and leaned on his seat. There might be more remnants of Haroun hiding in the mountains. I should inform the Western Lords and tell them to expand the range of scouting. Thinking about this, Alaric called a servant and instructed him to summon the Viscountess. A month went by in a flash. The redevelopment of Dudu's home village was already nearing its completion. With the resources from two princes and the various Western Lords, the once small village had turned into a town. The refugees who had lost their homes were sent to the newly developed town and were temporarily provided with housing. A town mayor and officials were also appointed to serve as leaders of the town. At this moment, Alaric was observing the construction of the town's walls together with Michel and some Western Lords. "Your Highness, the town is nearing its completion. Why don't you give it a name?" one of the Western Lords suggested with an ingratiating smile. Hearing this, Alaric shook his head. "That will not be appropriate. I must wait for Giovanni to return and discuss this with him. After all, a third of the materials and resources were bought with his money. I was thoughtless. Forgive me, Your Highness." Alaric waved his hand indifferently. "Don't mention this again. We have more important matters to worry about." Everyone nodded in agreement. In the past month, they discovered more remnant forces from Haroun. They were few in numbers, but they had caused them no small amount of headaches. "What is my next appointment?" Alaric turned his head to Michel, who had temporarily taken the role as his assistant. The Viscountess didn't find this job demeaning, for she believed that it was an honor to serve him. "We are to inspect the weapons and equipment sent from the capital," Michel replied. Alaric nodded. "Let's go then." He was about to enter his carriage when he saw a warrior on horseback rushing towards them with an urgent expression. "Your Highness, there is a report from Ackland Pass." Alaric frowned upon hearing this. "What happened?" he asked. Michel and the Western Lords perked their ears with solemn faces. The warrior got down from his horse, bowed to Alaric, and said, "Your Highness, Haroun's army has come." He then took out a letter from his inner pocket and handed it to Alaric. "This is a letter from Sir Redden." After verifying that the seal hadn't been tampered with, Alaric unrolled it. Written in the letter was a report about the situation in Ackland Pass. According to Redden, Haroun has sent an army consisting of more than 500,000 soldiers. His eyes darkened. Ackland Pass only had 50,000 soldiers, and they came from various houses, so they aren't very united. They had no hopes of defending the mountain pass from Haroun's troops. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Alaric issued a series of commands. "Tell the Western Lords to put up their defenses. Send word to the capital that the enemies are on their way to Ackland Pass. Those of you who have nothing to do, gather your army and head to the mountain pass to reinforce our troops." "Yes, Your Highness." Alaric no longer wasted any time. He brought his fingers to his mouth and made a whistling sound. In the next moment, a massive creature descended from the sky. Roar! Everyone wasn't surprised to see Zephyr. They had seen the beast on numerous occasions, so they had already grown used to its presence. Still, its intimidating aura made them feel nervous. Alaric jumped onto its back. Before leaving, he glanced at Michel and said, "Don't let anything happen to Dudu." The Viscountess nodded solemnly. "Yes, Your Highness. I will send our best warriors to protect Miss Dudu." Hearing this, Alaric nodded. He then commanded Zephyr to fly. Whoosh! After he left, everyone hurried to their tasks. In one of the mountains of Ackland Pass stood a defensive fortress surrounded by earthen walls. The military officers of the camp were currently gathered in the largest tent, which served as their meeting room. "Sir Redden, what should we do?" All the military officers turned their heads to Redden. He had arrived later than the rest of them, but Redden proved his strength through his fists. In the entire camp, other than the appointed commander, Redden's authority came next. With his arms crossed, Redden's face was terrifyingly grim. He didn't expect the enemy's numbers to be 500,000. It had exceeded his estimations. "Have you sent letters to your families?" He sent everyone a look. The officers understood his words, making the atmosphere even more gloomy. "How about we abandon the mountain pass and regroup with our allies stationed in the Farhan grasslands? With our numbers, we will only be demolished by Harun," an officer suggested with a grave look. No one responded to his words, but it was apparent that some of them had similar thoughts.
"No.
"We can't leave the mountain pass." Redden shook his head, his voice cold. "If we abandon this camp, Harun's army will gain momentum and they will take hold of this favorable terrain." He added, "What do you think, Commander Galliner?" Everyone looked at the silent giant seated at the foremost spot. It was because of this man that they were able to hold their wits. Galliner, the transcendent knight who had replaced Lucas Rank on the Estanian Dragon leaderboard. The leaderboard only recorded transcendent knights, so Lucas' name was removed after his breakthrough. Sensing everyone's gazes, Galliner opened his mouth. "We will defend the mountain pass." It was a firm announcement that didn't allow further discussion. Without waiting for a response, Galliner stood up and said, "Go to your stations. We must not allow the enemies to get past the mountain pass." "Yes, sir." Chapter 362. Cannon Fodder. Everyone hurried to their respective posts, observing the movements beneath the mountains. At this moment, Galliner stood atop the fortress wall, squinting his eyes as he peered into the distance. "I can feel them. They brought many transcendent knights and 3-ringed beast soul masters." With his heightened senses, he could feel the strong fluctuations of energy coming from afar. It was the aura unique only to powerful individuals. His steely expression conveyed his determination to defend the mountain pass despite the overwhelming odds. He looked back to observe his soldiers and noticed the anxiety and fear on their faces. He couldn't blame them for this. After all, they would be facing 500,000 warriors. Even he could feel the tension rising from his chest. "Don't overthink it," his voice suddenly echoed, taking everyone by surprise. Turning their heads, they saw Galliner atop the wall staring at them with a face devoid of fear. "The enemies outnumber us, but we hold the advantage in terrain. We have placed traps all over the mountain pass. If they want to breach our defenses, they must be prepared to lose half of their men." Galliner's words somehow calmed their hearts. His confidence was infectious, and it filled everyone with an overflowing fighting spirit. Only Galliner would dare say something so outrageous while still instilling them with courage. This was because they believed in his strength, the strength of someone at the top of the Estanian Dragon leaderboard. Soon, they felt the ground trembling and the distant sound of the enemy warriors drifted into their ears. "Artillery units, prepare to release the boulders at my signal," Galliner shouted while keeping his eyes beneath the mountains. The artillery units were still using the trebuchet engraved with fearsome abilities. These weapons might be quite outdated, but their range and firepower weren't to be underestimated. Facing this weapon, even high-ranking warriors and beast soul masters would be in danger if they weren't careful. In the next moment, the enemy finally entered their sights. There were so many of them that they looked like a swarm of ants from afar. The distant battle cries echoed across the mountain pass, instilling fear into their listeners. Galliner took a deep breath. He had already done his best to calm his troops. He could only hope that they wouldn't collapse from the pressure. The enemies didn't rest upon entering the mountain pass. They sent their infantry units, which numbered about 100,000 men, towards the fortress atop Aklan Pass. Seeing this, Galliner reminded the artillery units, "Hold! Don't release the boulders without my signal." They needed to properly time their ranged attacks to deal heavy damage to the enemy infantry units. Everyone anxiously glanced at Galliner, waiting for his signal. The enemies were approaching them with great speed. They would cross their firing range at any moment. "Now! Release the boulders!" Galliner bellowed and gestured with his hand. Hearing his roar, the artillery units immediately released the boulders, sending them flying towards the approaching enemy infantrymen. The large rocks burned in midair as the power imbued in them was automatically ignited. Whoosh! The scene was so strikingly dreadful. It was as if a rain of meteorites were about to fall into the world. The enemy infantry was fearless. Even with the huge burning boulders raining upon them, they continued their charge seemingly unafraid of death. Boom! Boom! One boulder after another smashed into the ground, killing hundreds of enemy infantrymen in the process. Some caught fire, while there were also unlucky people who were flattened by the boulders. Boom! Boom! More and more enemies died under the relentless bombardment of burning projectiles, significantly slowing down their advance. Screams of terror and panic echoed. The soldiers atop Ackland Pass felt invigorated at the sight of their enemies' brutal deaths. Our weapons are working. Do not fear them. Kill them all. Meanwhile, Galliner felt that something was amiss. The enemy infantry units were too weak. They couldn't even block the boulders. An elite knight could have destroyed those boulders. He narrowed his eyes and observed the enemy infantry units. It was then that he realized that all of them were just ordinary warriors with no traces of mana in their bodies. Something isn't right. Are they trying to use those men to empty our artillery projectiles? After he realized that the infantry units were merely cannon fodder, he immediately commanded, "Stop! Don't waste our projectiles on those men. They aren't a threat to us." Hearing his orders, the artillery units were baffled, but they heeded his command and stopped releasing the boulders. "Archers, wait for my signal." Galliner issued another order. The archers who had been itching to release their arrows immediately nocked their arrows and took aim at the approaching soldiers. On Haroun's side, beneath the mountain pass, at the rear line of their formation. "So they noticed, huh?" An old man holding a horsetail whisk clicked his tongue, feeling slightly annoyed. "Lord Lemuel, should we send the siege units now?" asked a muscular man holding a pair of gigantic axes. The old man shook his head, his mouth twitching. "Not yet. The infantry units we sent are just a distraction. The real attack is aimed somewhere else. The siege units will be sent later once chaos erupts in their fortress," he patiently explained. Although he was vexed by the muscular man's stupidity, he still needed the latter's strength. "Is this guy really a mythical knight?" Lemuel lamented while looking at the muscular man. "Just make sure that we win this battle. Otherwise, I will have your head," another person said. This time it was a middle-aged man dressed in steel armor. When he spoke, Lemuel didn't dare meet his gaze. He was more afraid of this guy than the muscular man. The blue star arrow of Haroun, Roger Varenholf. With his presence, this victory is ours for the taking. Lemuel smiled coldly, his eyes filled with anticipation. He could already picture himself receiving the promised rewards for winning this battle. Chapter 363, Armored Wyvern Corps. "Sir Galliner, a word from Sir Redden." Galliner heard an urgent voice behind him. He turned his head and saw a warrior rushing towards him, grim-faced. "Spit it out."
I'm Busse.
"Flying units are approaching the western side of the fortress." Sir Redden said that the flying beasts are mostly disaster-grade monsters. He is requesting artillery support. Galliner frowned and something clicked in his mind. The infantry units aren't just cannon fodder. They are decoys, so their target is the western side of the fortress. Should I send the artillery units there? He hesitated. He was afraid that this was another trap. If he sent the artillery to the western side, the enemy might take the chance to send their siege units. He took a deep breath and analyzed the situation. If the western side falls, it wouldn't be good for the fortress either. Galliner turned his head towards the rear line of Haroun's formation. He could sense two terrifying auras from there. Aside from those two powerful auras, they also have a cunning strategist on their side. "Sir Galliner," the warrior urged him again. Galliner looked at the warrior and nodded. "You have my permission, but you can only take 5 trebuchets at most. The rest will be left here to defend the main route. If that's not enough, I will send another 1,000 archers." The warrior seemed like he wanted to say something, but he held back when he saw Galliner's steely face. In the end, he sighed and lowered his head. "Thank you, sir." The warrior left and went to gather the artillery units and archers. Galliner didn't have time to dwell on this. He could only hope that Redden could defend the western side on his own. On the western side of the fortress, Redden was issuing a series of commands to the archers and beast soul warriors with ranged integrated traits. Damn it! Who would have thought that Haroun would actually send their armored wyvern corps in this battle? Redden's face was glum as he watched the thousands of armored wyverns flying across the sky. Each wyvern carried an archer equipped with longbows and javelins. "I only have 5,000 soldiers here since most of our troops are concentrated on the main route and the southern side of the fortress. Can we defend this area?" He wanted to convince himself that there was still a way, but he knew that with the number of troops at his disposal, defending the western side was impossible. Suddenly, the armored wyvern corps began their attacks. Their riders threw javelins upon them, while the wyverns spat out balls of fire the size of a washbasin. Whoosh! Whoosh! Boom! 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 "Take cover!" Redden shouted to his men. He then grabbed a bow and took aim at one of the wyverns. He was the former deputy commander Dragon Guards, so his skill in archery was top-notch even when compared to the most skilled archers. The wyverns were fast, but his eyes were able to follow their movements. In the next moment, he released the arrow which had been imbued with his mana, causing the air to violently fluctuate. Whoosh! Roar! A wyvern was struck by his arrow, making it cry out in pain. The beast plunged into the ground and died along with its rider. Redden didn't feel happy after the successful shot. The wyvern was just one of the thousands flying above the clouds. Even with his skills in archery, he couldn't possibly eliminate the armored wyvern corps by himself. On the other hand, his troops were struggling to take down the beasts. A few managed to hit lucky shots that killed the wyvern riders, but the numbers were negligible. This can't go on. His soldiers weren't trained to fight against flying units, so they were helpless against the armored wyvern corps. In just a quarter of an hour, hundreds of his soldiers were killed. Suddenly, he saw large projectiles flying overhead. Upon a closer look, he realized that those projectiles were actually boulders from their trebuchets. "Reinforcements are here," he shouted to his faltering men. Hearing his words, his soldiers felt a bit hopeful. Boom! Boom! With the help of the trebuchets and the 1,000 archers sent to reinforce them, the pressure on their side lessened. "We can do this." Redden leaped across the wall and landed on top of a wyvern. "What?" The wyvern rider was shocked and was about to attack when he was killed by Redden with a stab to his heart. After killing the rider, Redden threw his corpse and took the reins. The wyvern issued a sound of protest, but Redden didn't care. He tried to maneuver the beast to fly at his will. "Just listen to me if you don't want to die, moron." He slapped the beast's head using his sword. The wyvern was stubborn. It refused to obey his command, making Redden vexed. "What are you doing? Listen to me." "Shit." Knowing that his actions were futile, he jumped off the creature's back and landed awkwardly on the ground. "Damn. It actually tried to commit suicide and almost got me killed." He could already hear the panicked voices of his soldiers. "I'm here. Continue defending the wall. Don't let them get in," he shouted at the top of his lungs. Some of the armored wyvern corps targeted him when they saw that he was still alive. Seeing this, Redden imbued mana into his swords. "Do you think you can take me down so easily?" he bellowed as he brandished his swords, releasing powerful slashes with each strike. Whoosh! 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 3 wyverns fell from his attacks. A few more were also struck, but they managed to survive due to their tough armor. "I can't stay here. It won't be good if I run out of mana," he thought as he evaded the fireballs spat out by the wyverns. Boom! Boom! Why did I even try to ride that bloody beast? Damn. Chapter 364. Cavalrymen rushing down the mountain. While Redden was trying his best to stay alive, the situation in the fortress main gate suddenly changed. The enemy infantry units sacrificed themselves to trigger the traps laid down beneath the mountains. It was a cruel order, but Haroun's military officers didn't seem to care about the deaths of their men. "Sir," They are triggering all our traps, someone anxiously reported to Galliner. I know, but we cannot waste our artillery projectiles on those people, Galliner grimly responded, his eyes focused on the chaos beneath the mountains. They must be planning to sacrifice those people to pave the way for their main troops. Galliner narrowed his eyes. Without the traps, they would have a hard time slowing down the enemy's advance. He could stop the enemy infantry by sending their cavalrymen, but doing this would be too risky. I must preserve the strength of our main combat unit until the Haroon sends its main force. Otherwise, there would be no one to stop them. Soon, the enemy infantrymen managed to get through the first layer of the traps and were now making their way to the second layer. The archers in the fortress were already starting to feel weary from the repeated actions of drawing their bowstrings. Any moment from now, their bodies would collapse from exhaustion. Suddenly, Galliner noticed movements on the enemy's formation. They are sending more units. What is it this time? His face darkened as he watched more enemy units charging towards the fortress. Hold on. Those are... He saw the second wave of enemies bringing some sort of artillery weapons that looked similar to their trebuchets. While he was trying to identify the enemy's weapons, he heard a resounding explosion echoing across the mountains. Boom! Take cover. They have projectiles, he warned his men. Hearing his words, everyone fearfully hid behind the merlons to take cover from the incoming projectiles. In the next moment, multiple boulders struck the walls, causing violent tremors and deafening explosions. Boom! 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 Various parts of the walls were damaged and some unlucky warriors were crushed by the projectiles, killing them instantly. Seeing this, everyone felt a wave of terror. Their morale took a big hit, causing confusion and panic to spread. Galliner and the officers of the fortress did their best to calm their troops, but their efforts didn't seem to have much of an effect. It's not working. Everyone is panicking. Galliner frowned. He looked at the cowering troops and the approaching enemies, his eyes flashing with helplessness. There is no choice. I must go out there ahead of time to bring back our morale. Thinking about this, he jumped onto his horse and summoned the cavalry units with a loud roar. All cavalry units, prepare to charge with me. We must stop the enemies from advancing. His earth-shattering roar made everyone temporarily regain their clarity. Soon, the fortress cavalry units gathered behind him, waiting for his commands. Looking at the grim-faced soldiers, Galliner took a deep breath and drew his sword. Lift the gates. The soldiers responsible for manning the gates immediately took action. Clack, clack. As soon as the gates were lifted, Galliner squeezed his legs and shouted, his eyes blazing with ferocity. All cavalry units, charge with me. His ferocious roar triggered everyone's fighting spirit. With Galliner taking the lead, the fortress cavalrymen rushed down the mountain, bypassing the traps to eliminate the enemies who had broken through their defenses. The exhausted enemy infantry couldn't even slow them down as the furious cavalrymen mowed down everything in their path. With the momentum from going down the mountain, Galliner's cavalrymen seemed unstoppable. Elite knights, destroy their projectiles. Galliner roared when he saw the enemy projectiles flying overhead. Upon hearing his commands, the elite knights immediately gathered their mana, imbuing it into their weapons. When the large boulders were about to hit them, the elite knights abruptly made their moves. Bang! 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 The large boulders were blasted into smithereens, causing small rocks and debris to fly everywhere. However, these tiny rocks were insignificant to the trained cavalrymen. Aside from minor scratches, they were mostly unharmed. At this moment, Galliner had already made his way to the enemy's artillery units. He brandished his broadsword with terrifying force, causing the air to violently fluctuate. Whoosh! Whoosh! With one slash, an artillery weapon was destroyed. Many warriors tried to stop Galliner, but he was like a beast on a rampage, fierce and unstoppable. With every wave of his broadsword, dozens of enemy warriors were killed. His weapon was a relic bestowed by Alaric, and it significantly increased his combat power. The only downside was the high consumption of mana, but to a transcendent knight like him it was manageable. I must destroy these catapults to lessen the pressure on my troops, Galliner thought as he relentlessly targeted the artillery units. More and more powerful warriors tried to stop him, but they were unable to block his broadsword. Just a few more. He had already destroyed more than half of the enemy's artillery, but they suddenly retreated, forcing him to halt his advance. He pulled the reins and squinted his eyes while staring in a certain direction. His heart palpitated all of a sudden. One of the two is making their way here. He could sense a powerful presence locking in on him, making him feel uncomfortable. Retreat! Retreat to the fortress! He shouted decisively while urging his horse to turn around. Hearing the urgency in his voice, the cavalryman immediately turned around and rushed back to the fortress. Galliner and a few cavalry officers took the rear to buy time for their troops to retreat. With their efforts, their men managed to slip away and escape. "Don't even think of getting away after destroying our artillery," a furious roar echoed behind them, stunning everyone in place. Galliner and the cavalry officers felt as if an invisible energy was preventing them from escaping. With a grunt, Galliner brute-forced his way out of the enemy's control, the veins on his face and arms protruding like mini-serpents. "Leave! I will stop him." Chapter 365. Dantos, the mythical knight. The cavalry officers hesitated, but upon seeing his grave expression, they no longer dared to argue with him and reluctantly left. "You must return alive, Sir Galliner. We cannot defend this fortress without you." Galliner forced out a smile when he heard this. Against a mythical knight, his chances of escaping were slim. "Did I allow you to leave?" A furious shout drifted into his ears. Galliner looked up and saw a muscular warrior wielding a pair of gigantic axes descending from above like a mountain. "I can't let him target my men." Thinking about this, Galliner imbued mana into his broadsword, triggering its engraved ability. In the next moment, he released a slash that sliced through the air. Whoosh! Startled, the muscular mythical knight was forced to defend himself. Bang! Galliner's slash left a mark on one of his axes, making him feel a bit surprised. "You have some strength for a transcendent knight, but it's still lacking compared to a mythical knight." The man snorted upon landing on the ground with a backflip. Galliner furrowed his eyebrows. Although he didn't use his full force in that attack, he didn't expect his opponent to be so durable. "You are powerful, but you are not the most powerful being I've faced. Compared to them, you are average." Galliner clapped back with a sneer. Hearing this, the muscular mythical knight was enraged. Without saying anything, he imbued mana into his axes and unleashed a series of devastating blows. Whoosh! Whoosh! Galliner knew that he would be severely wounded if his opponent could land a direct hit. He didn't dare block the axes. He imbued mana into his legs to increase his movement speed. Bang! Bang! Deep craters were formed with each strike from the muscular mythical knight's axes. Galliner could barely dodge the attacks. As for his mount, it had already been smashed into a meat paste, its blood and flesh splattering like smashed watermelon. So powerful. For the first time, Galliner felt powerless. He had faced numerous foes, but this man was arguably the strongest. Luckily, his speed is not so great. Otherwise, I would have ended up like my horse. Suddenly, his opponent stopped his attacks. "Do you only know how to dodge?" A mocking voice drifted into Galliner's ears. Is this guy an idiot? Did he really think that I would fall for his taunts? He thought to himself, feeling a hint of contempt for his opponent's crappy attempt at goading him. Galliner didn't bother to respond. He turned around and grabbed an ownerless horse. He then squeezed his legs and urged it to climb up the mountain. Seeing this, the muscular mythical knight immediately pursued him while ferociously waving his axes. Whoosh! Whoosh! Bang! Bang! Galliner expertly maneuvered the horse to evade his strikes. "There is a ditch up ahead. I just need to lure him there to slow him down." He was responsible for overseeing the Ackland Pass, so he knew where all the traps were located. The horse he was riding was clearly exhausted, so he imbued mana into the poor creature to give it some strength. "Just a little bit more, little fellow," He whispered. Bang!
Bang!
The muscular warrior was still pursuing him, clearly intent on killing Galliner. However, he couldn't outrun a disaster-grade warhorse. Suddenly, Galliner maneuvered the horse to leap. The muscular mythical knight was surprised by the unexpected move. Before he could realize the situation, he suddenly found himself falling into a deep pit with sharp spikes protruding at the bottom. Shit! It was a trap! What a cunning bastard! He immediately imbued mana into his axes and released a powerful blow which destroyed the sharp spikes at the bottom of the pit.
Bang!
When he jumped out of the pit, he found out that his target had already retreated into the fortress. The guy even sent him a mocking smile which made him burn with fury. "I will kill you," he roared, his veins protruding in his agitation. He rushed towards the fortress with heavy strides. Meanwhile, Galliner commanded the archers and artillery units to aim at the approaching mythical knight. "Kill him! Don't let him get close to the fortress." With the man's unparalleled strength, his subordinates would only be massacred if he managed to enter the fortress. Galliner couldn't allow this to happen. With his order, everyone aimed at the mythical knight. Whoosh! Whoosh!
Su! Su! Su!
Hundreds of arrows and tens of boulders rained down from the sky. Seeing this, the muscular mythical knight snorted. "Do you think your flimsy little tactics can stop me, Dantos?" He brandished his axes, creating twisters with each strike. Whoosh! Whoosh! The fearsome twisters destroyed the arrows and boulders, leaving him completely unharmed. Everyone atop the fortress main gate was stunned upon seeing this. They couldn't believe that someone could actually wield such overwhelming power. "Mythical knight! That man is a mythical knight!" Someone exclaimed, terror evident in his tone. "What? No way! How can we stop a mythical knight?" Everyone panicked. To them, a mythical knight was a being of unimaginable strength. The thought of confronting someone at that level filled them with despair. Even Galliner felt helpless. He could no longer calm his troops. Just as everyone was about to lose hope, the earth-shaking roar of a beast suddenly echoed from the sky. Roar! Shocked, everyone lifted their heads and saw a massive winged creature circling the clouds. Zephyr! Galliner recognized the beast and his eyes immediately brightened. "It's His Highness! His Highness Alaric is here." Almost everyone in the fortress was already familiar with this creature, so they were excited upon recognizing it. The majestic presence of the catastrophe-grade beast sent a heavy, mountain-like pressure that forced the enemy troops to kneel. The man who had called himself Dantos managed to remain standing, but he was also intimidated by the beast's aura. "What in the world is that monster?" He frowned. As if sensing his gaze, the beast lowered its head and stared at him. It then emitted another loud cry. Roar! Chapter 366. Roger Varenholf. "That is a catastrophe-grade monster." Dantos frowned as he looked at the draconic lion hovering above the clouds. As confident as he was, he knew for sure that he couldn't defeat a beast at this level on his own. "I need that guy's help. Perhaps we can take it down if we work together." He thought about a certain person. While he was occupied with his own thoughts, the beast suddenly spat out a breath of flames upon him. Whoosh! The searing heat from the flames burned the grassland and turned it into a barren land. Meanwhile, Dantos was forced to stimulate his energy core to bring out immense mana to protect his body. However, even with the thick layer of mana protecting him, he still found the heat unbearable. "It's burning my flesh." He gritted his teeth and rushed out, trying his best to get as far away. Roar! Like a relentless ghost, the draconic lion chased him while spewing out flames at every chance. Boom! Boom! The vast grassland was slowly becoming a sea of fire as the pursuit continued. Many of Haroun's troops were also implicated. The poor soldiers didn't possess Dantos' vast mana pool. They weren't able to extinguish the beast's fearsome flames and were burned into ashes. "Damn it! I might really die here if that guy doesn't come here." Dantos gritted his teeth, his face turning pale. He had expended a large amount of mana to protect himself. Once his energy core was emptied out, he would be left completely defenseless. Suddenly, a bright ray of light appeared on the horizon. Whoosh! Seeing this, Dantos grinned. He finally decided to make a move. That bastard really loves to show up at the last minute. It turned out that the light was actually a mana arrow. The blue arrow flew at lightning speed towards the draconic lion. Boom! Did he get it? Dantos turned his head and squinted his eyes. A thick cloud of smoke obscured his vision, so he used his spiritual perception to sense the presence of the beast. To his surprise, the beast didn't seem to be affected. Its aura was still as vigorous as it had been, as if the blue mana arrow was nothing more than a bug bite. When the cloud of dust settled, everyone saw the draconic lion completely unharmed. Its majestic body was flawless with no marks of injury. A catastrophe-grade monster is indeed different. A nonchalant voice drifted as a figure dressed in steel armor with a blue cape appeared out of nowhere. In his left hand was a longbow, shining with magical lights. The various inscriptions on its body lit up with dazzling colors. At a glance, anyone could tell that his longbow wasn't just a mere relic-level weapon. Just the inscriptions engraved upon it exuded overwhelming energy that could make one's heart palpitate with fear. What took you so long? It almost got me. Dantos snorted with a hint of annoyance. If Roger had come any later, he would have been forced to use his trump card. Roger sent him a look, making the other feel uncomfortable. If only you had followed Sir Lemuel's strategy, this wouldn't have happened. Dantos looked away and replied in a displeased tone. Why do I have to follow that old man's strategy? I've had enough of his nonsense. Roger, we could have ended this battle if we had attacked from the start. Roger didn't bother to argue with him. Enough. Save your breath. We must deal with that monster first. After saying that, he pulled the bowstring and released a succession of blue mana arrows. Whoosh! 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 This was the engraved ability of his longbow, Blue Star Arrow. It was a skill engraved by a 4-ringed beast soul grandmaster. Each arrow was fast and capable of tearing apart the enemy's flesh upon contact. Just one hit was enough to kill a transcendent knight. Even mythical knights would be injured once struck by his arrows. At this moment, Alaric, who was standing on Zephyr's back, also felt the power of the arrows. Just the pressure they emitted sent chills down his spine. That longbow must be on the same level as my frigid dragon sword. So that's how powerful an epic-level weapon is when used by a mythical knight. I wonder how strong my sword would be once I reached that realm. While he was marveling at the power of the longbow, Zephyr finally took action. It swiped its paws and summoned several flame spears. When the flaming spears and the blue arrows struck each other, a series of explosions rocked the mountain pass. Boom! 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 The shockwaves caused tremors that destroyed the traps all around the mountains. Our traps have been destroyed, shouted a warrior from the fortress. The old strategist Lemuel also noticed this, so he immediately commanded all their forces to attack. Charge! Destroy the fortress and kill the dogs of Estania, the old man shouted while flourishing his horsetail whisk. Following his commands, Haroun's army rushed forward with great momentum. Their loud battle cry shook the mountain pass, instilling a wave of anxiety in the soldiers defending the fortress. We must take this chance while that monster is being held back by Idiot Dantos and Lord Roger. Once we occupy the fortress and establish a foothold, we can focus our attacks on their western territories without having to worry about being attacked from behind. Lemuel thought to himself as he watched their troops charge towards the fortress. The catastrophe-grade monster was a big variable to his plan, and it made him feel an ominous sensation. I need to take action myself to get things done quickly. Thinking about this, he jumped onto a disaster-grade armored monster elephant. Let's go and kill those Estanian dogs, he shouted while urging his mount to follow the charge. A team of 20 elite knights circled him, protecting him from any threat. With this level of protection, he was confident that he would be safe as long as the catastrophe-grade beast wouldn't attack him. Chapter 367. 20,000 versus 400,000. Sir Galanor, they are coming. Galanor furrowed his eyebrows. Zephyr and Alaric were currently fighting the two mythical knights, so they could only rely on themselves to defend the fortress. Artillery units, use the remaining boulders. Archers, release your arrows at will. The rest of you, pour hot oil over the ramparts. Galanor issued a series of commands. As soon as his words fell, everyone immediately took action. With over 400,000 warriors approaching them, they couldn't afford to waste a single second. In the next moment, everyone went into their respective positions to fulfill their tasks. The artillery units released their projectiles, while the archers unleashed a heavy barrage of arrows. On the other hand, the auxiliary units poured scalding hot oil over the ramparts. While his troops were busy with their tasks, Galanor gathered the remaining infantry units and cavalrymen for one final battle. Whether they survived or not would depend on Alaric and Zephyr. Soon, Haroun's troops had already approached the foot of the mountain. The steep slopes slowed down their advance and gave enough time for Galanor's forces to catch their breath. Alaric noticed the situation and hesitated. Zephyr, can you handle those two on your own? He whispered to the draconic lion. The beast emitted a sound while nodding its head. Seeing this, Alaric no longer hesitated. Then I will leave them to you. After saying that, he jumped off the beast's back and landed on the ground. He then bolted towards the fortress and climbed his way to the top with nimble movements. The soldiers atop the fortress were shocked by his sudden appearance. Your Highness, someone exclaimed. Alaric waved his hand and asked while sweeping his gaze. Where is Galanor? Sir Galanor is gathering the infantrymen and cavalrymen. Someone answered in a grim voice. They all knew that it was an impossible task to stop 400,000 warriors with their numbers. Hearing this, Alaric didn't linger and left with haste. He had sensed Galanor's presence together with the remaining infantrymen and cavalrymen numbering about 20,000. A huge bulk of their troops were defending each of the four sides, so this was the most he could gather. Your Highness! Galanor greeted him as soon as he sensed Alaric's aura. Your Highness! The soldiers also greeted Alaric with utmost respect. If he hadn't arrived, the fortress would have already been breached by Dantos. Alaric nodded to acknowledge their greetings. Bring me a horse. He smiled grimly at Galanor. Your Highness, are you intending to? Galanor understood his intentions. He wanted to dissuade Alaric from joining, but he knew that it would be useless. Without any choice, he could only follow his instructions. A horse was brought to Alaric. It was a disaster-grade warhorse owned by a military officer who was unfortunately killed in battle. Alaric wasn't picky and quickly jumped onto the creature. He urged the horse to approach Galanor and remarked casually to ease the tension. It looks like we will be fighting side by side again. It is my honor, Your Highness. Galanor chuckled dryly. Alaric could sense that the enemy was close by. They are almost here. It's time for us to go. Galanor nodded in agreement. He then raised his sword and shouted to the troops. Warriors of Estania, prepare for battle. The gates were soon lifted and Galanor issued the command to charge. Charge! With him and Alaric at the lead, everyone rushed out of the fortress once more, shouting to ease their anxiety. Kill! Defend the fortress! Their forces looked tiny compared to Haroun's troops, but not one of them hesitated to descend the mountain. Let's kill our way in, shouted Alaric as he drew his swords. Shying, with a squeeze of his legs, he urged his horse to run faster. The horse neighed and galloped forward under his incessant urging. Bang! Alaric and the warriors of the fortress clashed with Haroun's troops, forcefully stopping their advance with their momentum. At this moment, Alaric unleashed a bloody carnage, killing dozens of warriors with every slash of his swords. Whoosh! Whoosh! Those who died under his blade were turned into ice sculptures before breaking into fragments of ice. Truly a fearsome sight to behold. Galanor wasn't to be outdone. With sheer physical prowess, he mowed down the enemies that blocked his path. He sliced his way into the enemy formation like a meat grinder, leaving a path of corpses in his wake. With two powerful transcendent knights leading them, the morale of the warriors of the fortress soared. With their newfound vigor, they fearlessly penetrated through the enemy formation. Harun's 400,000-man army was surprisingly stopped by a mere 20,000 troops. However, this soon changed when Lemuel commanded their strongest units to take over. Those two are the most troublesome. I must kill them first. Thinking about this, he slapped the elephant monster with his horsetail whisk, urging it to move with the elite troops. Harun's elite troops were composed of 20,000 knights and elite knights. They were also led by 9 transcendent knights, including Lemuel. With their sudden appearance, Alaric's charge was put to an abrupt halt. This must be their elite troops. He frowned when he sensed the powerful auras emitted by the enemy warriors. He found himself trapped in an encirclement with nowhere to escape. Without hesitation, Alaric stimulated his energy core and unleashed a powerful burst of energy. He then imbued his swords with his overflowing mana to activate their abilities. Soon, the temperature around him dropped, making the enemy soldiers feel a chill. The abrupt change in the temperature caught them by surprise, and Alaric took this opportunity to release a flurry of slashes. Whoosh! Whoosh! With each slash, several warriors were turned into ice sculptures. The ground beneath his feet also froze and slowly turned into a land of ice. In this field, Alaric's abilities were enhanced. "Allow me to test my new sword techniques on you," he muttered as he executed the new techniques he had comprehended. A series of dazzling strikes were released, bringing about snowflakes that turned enemies into ice upon contact. Chapter 368. Duel. The sword techniques that Alaric displayed seemed out of this world. Each move looked so magical that everyone didn't even know how they had fallen prey to it. Soon, the place around Alaric had turned into a world of ice and snow. "He is a monster. How can we stop someone like that? Spread out. Don't stay too close to each other." Even an elite party could fall apart when faced with an impossible challenge. That was what happened to the warriors who had faced Alaric. They found themselves helpless before him. "Move out of my way." A deep voice suddenly drifted into everyone's ears. Everyone turned their gazes over and saw a man with a wolf pelt over his head and shoulders. His intimidating frame was over 7 feet tall, muscular, and covered in tattoos. As soon as he arrived, the soldiers of Harun exclaimed, "It's Lord Edgar." Alaric frowned. This man's aura was overflowing with vigorous energy. It felt like he was an untamable beast, vicious and dangerous. He quickly used his appraisal on him and discovered that the man they call Edgar was a transcendent knight. He wasn't just an ordinary transcendent knight, but someone whose strength was already on par with those in the top 20 of the Estanian Dragon leaderboard. "Who are you?" Edgar was holding a spiked mace which the soldiers like to call Morning Star, due to its shape that resembled a star. While keeping his gaze on the other party, Alaric stated his name in a calm voice. "Alaric." Edgar felt a bit perturbed by his indifference. He was surrounded by enemies on all sides, but he managed to remain calm. Edgar rarely encountered someone like this on the battlefield. "I am Edgar Finmore, commander of the Iron Cross Infantry Battalion. Alaric, I request a duel." Hearing this, everyone was stunned. They were in the middle of a war, but he actually requested a duel. Alaric was also taken aback. He didn't expect to meet such an old-fashioned warrior on the battlefield. Looking at the man's face, it didn't seem like he had any hidden motives. Is he that confident in his strength? Most of Edgar's attributes were higher than his own, but Alaric held the advantage when it came to techniques and pure combat abilities. With his SSS-Rank swordsmanship trait, he could surmount the gap in raw attributes. As long as the enemy wasn't a mythical knight, Alaric was confident that he wouldn't be defeated. "With Aru as our witness, I accept your request for a duel," Alaric boldly responded, his response garnering mixed reactions from the crowd. With the unexpected duel from both warriors, the war between the two sides was temporarily put to a halt. It was as if they were confident that their representatives would win the duel. Meanwhile, Lemuel nearly had a migraine at the sudden twist of events. That dimwit. Why did he have to challenge someone to a duel when we could easily defeat them with our numbers? I should have brought someone else instead of bringing Dantos and his cronies. He was filled with regret. He was hasty in gathering this army, so he accepted those who had volunteered to join them. Edgar was a highly respected warrior in Harun. His reputation was even greater than his own, who was appointed as the strategist of this army. Lemuel knew full well that he couldn't stop this duel. He could only hope that Edgar would defeat his opponent quickly. Hold on, did he call himself Alaric? That name sounds familiar. Lemuel frowned as he sorted his memories. Just as the duel had begun, he suddenly remembered where he had heard the name. It's him, Alaric Silversword, the son of Lucas Silversword and Jade Christine Estania. Lemuel was exhilarated. He had actually stumbled upon a member of Estania's imperial family, not to mention that it was one of the recognized heirs who might inherit the throne. If I take his head... An unusual gleam flashed in his eyes as he looked at Alaric, who was currently fighting with Edgar. No matter the results, his head is mine. At this moment, Alaric and Edgar had already exchanged dozens of moves. Clang, clang. Edgar held the upper hand when it comes to raw strength and speed, but Alaric was able to keep up with him using his superb sword techniques and nimble footwork. Everyone gave the two fighters enough room for the duel. It was tacit understanding from both sides, which also temporarily gave them some time to catch their breath. "Will His Highness be all right, sir?" a warrior whispered to Galliner, his voice filled with concern. Galliner was focused on the duel, but he still responded, "I have full trust in His Highness' abilities. He will not lose. What if those Harun bastards attack him in the middle of the duel?" Hearing this, Galliner's expression darkened. "I won't let that happen. You guys keep watch. If you see them making any unusual moves, stop them immediately." "Yes, sir." It wasn't just them who were wary. The soldiers of Harun were also closely watching their every move. While both sides were keeping each other in check, the battle between Alaric and Edgar was getting more intense. The two warriors had now activated the engraved abilities of their weapons and equipment. Clang, clang,
Bang!
bang. Your strength is not bad, but for how long can you control that short sword of yours? Edgar grinned while staring at his opponent's face. He noticed that Alaric's weapon was special. Its power wasn't something that a relic should possess, so he guessed that it was at the level of an artifact. Interesting. What is his background? Intrigued by his opponent's identity, Edgar was a bit distracted. This gave Alaric the chance to deliver some serious hits which left wounds on his body. "I have underestimated you. I will be serious now." Edgar pounced at Alaric and unleashed a downward strike that seemed to be capable of tearing anything apart. Whoosh! Seeing this, Alaric wasn't flustered. He stimulated his energy core and unleashed more mana, which significantly increased the power of his swords. Chapter 369, Frost Edge Domain. Clang! Sparks flew in all directions the moment their weapons clashed with each other. Alaric could feel his arms going numb from the impact, but it was still within his level of tolerance. With his mana powering his swords, Edgar failed to overwhelm him despite the clear difference in their raw strength. "TSK." Edgar clicked his tongue, feeling somewhat annoyed. He had put a lot of strength and mana into that attack, but it didn't seem to have any effect on his opponent. His mana is surprisingly high for someone as young as him. Does his energy core hold more mana than mine? He frowned when he thought of this. The more mana one possessed, the more power they could execute. They could even surpass their physical limits as long as their mana was sufficiently powerful. "I must end this battle now." Thinking about this, Edgar summoned 3/4 of his remaining mana to deliver his ultimate move. It was a technique passed down for generations in his household, a technique that doubled his attack power for a split second. It involved intricate control with mana, a specific set of movements and breathing patterns. Without doing all three correctly, he would fail to unleash this power. However, Edgar had trained this technique for decades, and he was confident that he could perform it correctly. In the next moment, his aura abruptly rose. The sudden surge of mana caused violent fluctuations in the air around him. His wolf pelt fluttered vigorously. You have my respect as a warrior, but this is where it ends, Edgar muttered coldly before he swung the morning star. Whoosh! Alaric felt a wave of fear when he sensed this fearsome power. He never would have thought that he would actually witness such a terrifying technique. What kind of technique is that? Before this duel, he had already expended a lot of stamina and mana. He knew for sure that he couldn't block or dodge this attack, but there was still a way to overcome this precarious situation. Alaric took a fleeting glance at the bracelet gifted by his mother and smiled faintly. Thank you, Mom. All of a sudden, his eyes narrowed into slits. He didn't plan to just stand there and wait for his enemy to crush him. He summoned a multitude of ice spears and released them towards Edgar, hoping to at least slow him down or weaken his attack. Whoosh! Whoosh! Unfortunately, Edgar ignored the ice spears and forcefully swung his mace. Boom! Alaric managed to twist his body at the last second, but his shoulder was still struck by the mace, which broke his bones and destroyed his flesh. Alaric staggered, his gaudy armor drenched with his blood. Edgar stared deeply at him. I will never forget your name, Alaric, he muttered as he approached his opponent with cold, indifferent eyes. Just as he was about to deliver the final blow, a bright golden light suddenly enveloped Alaric's body. What's going on? He squinted his eyes and witnessed something shocking. Alaric's broken shoulder was mending at a visible rate. What a powerful healing spell. It didn't take long for Alaric's wounds to close up. If it weren't for the blood on his armor, no one would have believed that he was severely wounded just now. It's my turn now, Edgar. You are not the only one who has a technique at that level. Alaric waved his swords and gathered his remaining mana to perform a sword technique. It was one of the sword techniques he was trying to perfect. It was so strong that he had given it a name. Frost Edge Domain. A mini-domain of ice was summoned, and all the ice within this domain was in Alaric's control. You have established an affinity with the ice element, Edgar exclaimed in shock and disbelief. Among transcendent knights, only a handful managed to command the elements. It was widely believed that whoever could wield the elements in the transcendent realm had the potential to become mythical knights. Rumble. A wall of ice was erected, preventing Edgar from escaping. In the next moment, 100 warriors made from ice suddenly appeared. Each of them carried a sword. Moreover, they all had the aura of an elite knight. Alaric indifferently glanced at Edgar and muttered, "Kill him." As soon as he gave the order, the ice warriors pounced at Edgar simultaneously. They brandished their swords, giving rise to a cold breeze. Edgar gritted his teeth and defended himself with all his might. Even with his mana nearly depleted, he was still a transcendent knight. Multiple ice warriors broke into tiny fragments with each strike from his mace. Shit. My mana is nearly exhausted, and I'm also starting to get tired. Sweat trickled down his face as he destroyed ice warriors, 5 or more at a time. Soon, he had destroyed more than half of the ice warriors, but something chilling happened. More ice warriors appeared, replacing those that had been destroyed. This time, another 100 of them were summoned. What in the bloody hell? He stared at Alaric's emotionless face with a hint of trepidation. He didn't want to admit it, but Alaric's unusual ice domain terrified him. Inside my domain, all my ice warriors are eternal. A nonchalant voice drifted into his ears, making him feel more uneasy. Wait, why are you using such an underhanded technique in a sacred duel witnessed by hundreds of thousands of warriors? Have you no shame? Edgar's eyes darted around, searching for a way to get out of the situation. Alaric chuckled, his eyes filled with disdain.
Underhanded technique?
Edgar, I thought you were an honorable warrior, but you are nothing but a coward. What did you say? Edgar was agitated, but he didn't dare make a move. He kept his gaze on the approaching ice warriors. I have lost interest in this duel. Kill him and rip his body into shreds. Alaric issued a command. The ice warriors immediately took action. They rushed towards Edgar and attacked him from all directions. Chapter 370. Galliner, the insurmountable wall. What are you guys waiting for? Go and save Lord Edgar. A voice suddenly echoed when the ice warriors were about to kill Edgar. But this is a sacred duel. How can we interfere when Aru is watching this match? Most of Harun's citizens were also believers of Aru, so they treated duels as sacred. Lemuel was exasperated. We are at war, you morons. Do you want to see Lord Edgar killed? He shouted furiously. After some hesitation, some of Harun's soldiers rushed into the ice domain to save Edgar. However, a towering figure suddenly appeared to block their path. How dare you interfere with the sacred duel? Are you not afraid of facing Aru's wrath? It sounded absurd for one man to stop thousands of soldiers, but facing this man, they felt an inexplicable domineering pressure. Don't be afraid. It's just one person. A transcendent knight from Harun shouted as he urged his horse to move ahead. As his horse galloped, he swung his halberd with incredible force. Whoosh! Galaner's expression remained serene in the face of this man's attack. With a disdainful snort, he brandished his broadsword while activating its engraved ability. Clang! The collision of their weapons caused a fearsome shockwave that rocked the mountains. What? The transcendent knight wielding a halberd was stunned. I am not his opponent. Feeling terrified by the other party's strength, he gritted his teeth and imbued more mana into his arms and halberd to mitigate the damage coursing through his body. You are too weak. A cold voice drifted into his ears before he found himself being flung away like a rag doll. After eliminating the transcendent knight, Galaner wreaked havoc. No man could get past him, and all those who tried were cut into pieces. Even their mounts weren't spared. Intimidated by his strength, the troops of Harun took an abrupt halt, their eyes frozen with fear. He defeated a transcendent knight in just one strike. How can we fight someone like that? At this moment, Galaner was surrounded by pieces of flesh and broken equipment. His armor and body were drenched in blood, making him look even more terrifying. While everyone was hesitant to attack, a huge shadow suddenly appeared, charging recklessly with heavy momentum. It's Lord Lemuel. Lord Lemuel's mount isn't an ordinary beast. Even among disaster-grade monsters, it's classified as one of the strongest. Lord Lemuel is also a transcendent knight. If it's him, maybe he can defeat that man. The one who took action was the old strategist Lemuel. What a useless bunch of idiots. I need to eliminate that man myself to avoid more casualties. We still need more men to invade the Western territories. Thinking about this, Lemuel slapped the elephant with the horsetail whisk, urging it to go faster. Barag! The elephant monster emitted a sound as if reacting to its master's commands. Any man who would bump into this creature would be flattened, but Galaner didn't seem to be afraid of it. Instead of evading or repositioning himself, he stood his ground and adjusted his stance, clearly intending to face it head-on. Foolish. My beloved pet might be a disaster-grade monster, but even transcendent knights would have a hard time blocking its full-strength charge. Lemuel sneered while preparing an attack of his own. He imbued mana into his horsetail whisk, creating sharp wind blades that hurtled towards Galaner. Facing the old strategist and his elephant, Galaner suddenly released a devastating downward slash. Whoosh! Bang! To everyone's horror, his broadsword cut the elephant monster in half with just one blow. Its internal organs and muscles were still twitching, a gruesome sight to behold. On the other hand, the old strategist managed to evade the killing blow, but one of his arms was missing. How can this be?
Impossible.
Clutching the bleeding stump, he looked at the imposing figure ahead, his eyes shaking with terror. Galaner turned his head and locked gazes with him, making the old strategist flinch. You have disturbed the sacred duel. Even death cannot help you atone for your sins. Galaner approached him with an indifferent expression. Lemuel was scared witless. He turned around and shouted to the soldiers. Kill him. Don't just stand there. Kill that man. The soldiers couldn't believe what they saw. They were stupefied. It was only when the old strategist had shouted that they awakened from their stupor. They went into battle formation and rushed towards Galaner while roaring furiously. Kill him. Avenge our comrades. Galliner stared deeply at the old strategist who had escaped within the throng of people. What a slippery rat. He pulled his eyes away and focused his attention on the approaching enemies. If you want to get past me, then you will have to climb over my corpse. With a snort, he threw himself into the enemy formation. Meanwhile, Edgar was now taking the ultimate beating of his life. He had run out of mana and he was exhausted. He could barely lift his mace and he could no longer put up much of a fight. Even killing one ice warrior became a difficult task for him. Just how many of these ice warriors can he summon? He gritted his teeth while looking at the figure, indifferently standing behind the ice warriors. Edgar didn't know how many he had destroyed. What made him vexed was that his opponent would simply summon another wave to replace those that had fallen. Alaric, fight me like a man, he shouted in a hoarse voice. However, Alaric had no intention of listening. He just coldly watched as the ice warriors pounced upon Edgar and cleaved his body with their ice swords. Whoosh! Whoosh! Edgar found himself unable to fight back. The unending wave of enemies drained his mana and stamina, leaving him with no energy to defend himself. Soon, his dominant arm was cut off. Arg! He grimaced as he tried to push his way out of the encirclement. The ice warriors continuously stabbed his body, leaving numerous bloody holes. Blurk! Spitting a mouthful of blood, Edgar fell to his knees while breathing heavily. Chapter 371. Haroun's army retreats. Edgar collapsed, his eyes obscured by his blood, but he could still see the figure of his enemy. He wanted to say something, but an ice warrior suddenly stabbed his neck. KHHHK. This must be retribution for my sins. Father, grandfather, I am ashamed of myself. The light in his eyes slowly vanished and his breathing soon stopped. Alaric didn't have the time to rest even after his opponent's death. He noticed that Galliner and the warriors of the fortress were doing their best to hold back the enemies. I must help them. Thinking about this, he rushed to aid Galliner first, who was in a terrible position. Your Highness! Galliner already knew that Alaric would win the duel. Let's chat later. We should deal with them first, Alaric shouted while wildly swinging his swords. Galliner nodded in response, his face looking grim. The two fought side by side, killing hundreds of enemies in a matter of minutes. However, the wave of enemies seemed endless. No matter how many they killed, more people would replace them. Even with their high mana levels and overwhelming battle prowess, exhaustion slowly crept into their bodies. As the battle dragged on, their movements became sluggish and it was getting increasingly difficult to defend themselves. Your Highness, you must retreat to the fortress. I will gather our remaining men to pave a way for you, Galliner suddenly shouted. Hearing this, Alaric smirked and replied with a mysterious expression. It's all right, Galliner. They will be here soon. Galliner was baffled by his response, but he no longer said anything and just focused his attention on the battle. He couldn't afford to lose focus since a single error would mean death. The battle continued for another half an hour. It was intense and grueling, but both Galliner and Alaric somehow survived. Both men stood atop a mountain of corpses, barely standing. Among the 20,000 troops that had followed them, more than 15,000 were already killed. The remaining few thousand were worn out, but they couldn't even get some rest. They are already out of mana. Don't be afraid. The old strategist's gleeful voice echoed across the mountain pass. Just a little bit more. Lemuel stared at Alaric, who was using one of his swords as a crutch to prevent himself from falling over. With just a glance, he knew for sure that this guy was done for. As long as I can get his head, I will be rewarded with enough resources to help me advance to the next realm. He laughed coldly in his heart. However, he didn't dare get close to Alaric and Galliner. Just the two of them managed to kill thousands of men on their own. The strength of the two warriors made him terrified. Just then, the ground suddenly trembled. Lemuel was startled when he sensed the shaking of the ground. Is it the catastrophe-grade monster? He looked around and saw that the monster was still fighting the two mythical knights in the distance. Their battle was so intense that they destroyed an entire mountain. No. Something else is coming. It didn't take long for him to discover an approaching army, rushing towards Ackland Pass with great momentum. "Lord Lemuel, enemy reinforcements are coming. What should we do?" Lemuel didn't respond. He stared at the approaching army and assessed their numbers. "There are about 100,000 of them. We still outnumber them, but our troops are already exhausted. If we clashed with their troops, we would only suffer heavy casualties." He frowned, his heart beating with anxiety. He was so close to fulfilling his objective, but another variable had appeared. Should I kill the prince first, or should I order a retreat? Gritting his teeth, he hesitated. "Damn it!" he cursed under his breath. He observed the battle situation and reluctantly ordered the retreat. "Sound the horns. We are retreating." Upon hearing his voice, Harun's troops sounded their horns, signaling their retreat. Lemuel glanced at Alaric's figure and left in haste. Giovanni could see the large swarm of enemies on the mountain pass. "Our warriors are still alive. Faster, everyone," he shouted to the troops behind him. He had brought the reinforcements stationed at the borders of the Western territories. They had prepared these troops in case Harun launched their attack. When he received the letter sent by the people from Ackland Pass, he thought that they wouldn't make it in time. However, he witnessed something beyond his wildest imagination. The fortress in Ackland Pass with just 50,000 soldiers actually managed to stop 400,000 troops. No matter the results of this war, he knew that this battle would go down in history as one of the most unbelievable sagas. Turning his head, he saw Alaric's tamed monster fighting against two warriors with oppressive auras. Mythical knights. He wasn't unfamiliar with this aura since his father, the emperor, possessed the same overwhelming power. "Your Highness, the enemies are retreating," someone reported, pulling him from his thoughts. Hearing this, Giovanni frowned. Harun outnumbered them by over 4 times, but they actually decided to retreat. What did this mean? It meant that their troops were exhausted. Realizing this, Giovanni drew his sword and imbued mana into his horse while urging it to run faster. "Don't let them get away. Chase them," he bellowed. Estania's troops quickly answered his call. "Kill them. Kill the enemies." With the second prince leading the charge, everyone fearlessly followed. "Your Highness, please stay close to me," Giovanni's right-hand man, Andre Thompson, reminded him. "Lord Andre, don't get left behind." Giovanni snorted. Looking at his stubborn expression, Andre could only helplessly follow. To think that the once arrogant prince would actually do something like this. Just what kind of spell did Alaric cast on him? In the past, Giovanni would have never done something so reckless. He would only command his subordinates to do the most difficult tasks while he would just wait for the results. However, since he came to the Western region, it was like he had suddenly become a different person. "Well, it's not like this is a bad thing." Andre smiled faintly as he watched Giovanni's back. Chapter 372. Giovanni's Relief. With the arrival of Giovanni and more than 100,000 warriors, Harun's troops left the mountain pass without hesitation. However, Giovanni didn't plan to let them leave without making them suffer. Under his command, they chased after the retreating enemy troops and harassed them continuously for several miles. This assault resulted in the deaths of over 20,000 warriors from Harun's side. Giovanni was still unsatisfied, but he no longer pursued the enemies since they had traveled far from Ackland Pass. He was worried that Harun had more troops hidden somewhere, so he ordered his army to return to the mountain pass. "We are heading back. Sound the horns," he shouted as he stared at the enemies who were moving further and further away. Bram! At the sound of the horns, Giovanni's troops turned around and headed back to Ackland Pass. Upon their return, they saw the aftermath of the battle. There were dead bodies scattered all over the place. The Green Mountains were drenched in blood and the vast grasslands had turned into hell. It was bloody and gruesome. The strong scent of blood would make even the toughest man frown in disgust. Lifting his head, Giovanni saw the few thousand survivors sitting in the middle of the corpses, tired and exhausted. "Tend to the injured and check if there are any survivors. Healers, Prioritize those with severe injuries and leave the rest to the doctors. The rest of you make sure that all enemies are dead. Stab their heads if necessary. Giovanni issued a series of commands. Yes, Your Highness. Everyone immediately moved separately to complete their respective duties. It is a miracle that they survived that battle. Andre's lamenting voice echoed behind him. Giovanni nodded in agreement. If he were in their position, he didn't know if he would survive. Where is Alaric? Find him for me. He ordered as he looked at the faces of the corpses, a strange wave of unease gripping his heart. Yes, Your Highness. He once treated Alaric as an enemy, but things had changed in the past few weeks. You are not dead, are you? He thought to himself. As they marched along the corpse-ridden mountain pass, they soon found themselves at the foot of the fortress. Most of the survivors were gathered here and they were being treated by the healers and doctors. At this moment, a warrior rushed towards Giovanni on horseback with an urgent look on his face. Your Highness, I found His Highness Alaric. He is being treated at the fortress as we speak. Hearing this, Giovanni furrowed his eyebrows. Take me there, he told the warrior. The warrior brought them to the fortress. Giovanni and his subordinates frowned upon seeing the collapsed walls and the broken barracks. What a disaster! Someone remarked in a gloomy tone. A moment later, they arrived at the main square where the corpses of their comrades were gathered. Some bodies had missing limbs, while some were no longer recognizable. The sight of their bodies filled Giovanni and his men with grief. Aru, please guide them to your kingdom, someone solemnly prayed. Soon, they arrived at the makeshift tents where the injured were being treated. They could hear the screams of the warriors who were receiving treatment as well as the cries of those who had lost their brothers and friends. Giovanni's heart was heavy as he headed to where Alaric was being treated. Your Highness! Everyone greeted Giovanni upon seeing him. They were grateful for his timely arrival. If they had come late, the fortress would have been destroyed and none of them might have survived. Upon entering the tent, Giovanni saw two men lying on the floor grimacing as their wounds were being patched up. He recognized them both despite their haggard appearance. Alaric, Sir Galliner, I am glad to see you both safe. Giovanni breathed a sigh of relief. Hearing his words, Alaric turned his head and forced a smile. You arrived on time, Giovanni. Giovanni crouched and inspected Alaric's wounds. How do you feel? What do you think? Alaric retorted while grimacing. Giovanni chuckled. He tapped Alaric's shoulder, making the latter hiss in pain. Good job, Alaric. You guys defended the fortress well. Andre, who was watching this interaction, sent Giovanni a strange look. He had never seen the second prince act this warmly in front of someone. What are we going to do now? Giovanni asked in a low voice. On their way here, he received a report that only 12,000 warriors had survived from the 50,000 men in the fortress. It was a heavy loss. Alaric was silent for a moment. This was because he received a notification from the system. Under. Mission complete. Rewards 1,500 battle points, 30 stat points, 30 EXP, random trait card X1. Under. Do you want to use your random trait card? Yes. No. Alaric chose no and closed the system with a thought. However, another system notification popped up in front of his eyes. Under. Mission, Haroun's Invasion 2. Mission difficulty, hard. Forced to retreat from Ackland Pass, Haroun's higher-ups are furious. They will launch another attack after recuperating their losses. Defend the fortress and don't let them gain control over the mountain pass. Mission rewards, 1,500 battle points, 30 stat points, 30 EXP. Random trait upgrade card X1. Under. They still haven't given up on Ackland Pass. The mountain pass was a strategic location. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Whoever took control of the mountain pass would have the advantage in the coming battles. Thinking about this, he stared at Giovanni and replied in a grim voice. No matter what happens, we must defend Ackland Pass. Once they take control of the mountains, they would gain a foothold which would be difficult to take back. Giovanni took a deep breath and frowned. Alaric's words were true, but they were up against an army that was almost 4 times their size. After some thought, Giovanni eventually nodded his head. All right, we will defend the mountain pass. Chapter 373, Where is Zephyr? However, with the fortress in shambles and the troops exhausted, how do you intend to stop their army? Giovanni asked. The fortress was severely damaged, and it would take some time before everything could be repaired. Furthermore, the soldiers, especially the survivors from the fortress, were still not in perfect condition for another battle. Some of them had developed mental trauma that even a healer couldn't treat. Alaric was also aware of this. He had seen the state of the fortress and the conditions of the survivors. Even with Giovanni's reinforcements, they were still at a disadvantage. We will wait. I have sent word to Exler. As long as we can get him to send the Griffin Knight's order, we will have a reliable force that can help us in the coming battle. Alaric responded as he slowly sat up with the help of the doctors. Hearing this, Giovanni and André were stunned. The Griffin Knight's order that he mentioned was an aerial unit under the imperial family's command. It was a powerful force with 10,000 knight riders, with each knight possessing a griffin at the fatal grade or disaster grade. However, there was one problem. Without the Emperor's approval, no one could take control of the Griffin Knight's order, not even the Crown Prince. Your Highness, without His Majesty's permission, even His Highness Leonard Exler could not command the Griffin Knight's order. André reminded with a frown. Sir André is right, Alaric. The Griffin Knight's order is indeed powerful, but we do not have the authority to command them. Giovanni sighed while shaking his head. Alaric smiled faintly at their words. I know what you two are thinking. Everyone believed that the Emperor was sick, but according to his mother, Jade Christine, the Emperor was most likely faking an illness. Even if the Emperor wouldn't make the decision, someone else had this authority. With His Majesty's condition unknown, there is someone else who can make the decision. Alaric sent them a mysterious look. Giovanni seemed to have understood his meaning. You don't mean? He thought about the man who had faithfully served the Emperor for decades. He was the symbol that represented the Emperor's will. Your Highness, are you talking about Lord Dominic? André hesitantly asked. Alaric nodded. That's right. As long as Leonard could send my letter to Lord Dominic, he would make the decision in place of His Majesty. Giovanni crossed his arms and furrowed his eyebrows. I have met Lord Dominic a few times in the past, and he is not the kind of man who would just willingly listen to someone. It would take more than a letter to convince him. Alaric was convinced that the Emperor wasn't sick. If he were to know of Haroun's invasion, he would definitely send military support to the western borders. However, Alaric couldn't tell them this, so he could only use Dominic's name. That's true, but this is a national crisis. I am sure that Lord Dominic will make the right choice. Giovanni exhaled a deep breath. I hope you are right. He then got up and told the doctors to take care of Alaric. Stay here and recuperate. I will handle the situation. He reminded Alaric. All right, I will leave everything to you. Alaric nodded. Just as Giovanni's group was about to leave, Alaric suddenly remembered something important. Hold on. Have you seen Zephyr? Giovanni turned his head and raised an eyebrow. You mean your tamed monster? Alaric nodded. I haven't seen it since I was sent here. Could you find it for me? On their way here, Giovanni saw the draconic lion being treated by a group of doctors. He didn't get a closer look, but it seemed like it had been injured in battle. He hesitated whether he should tell this to Alaric, but he eventually decided not to inform him for the time being. All right, I will look for it. It's a catastrophe-grade beast, so I am sure it is fine. He was afraid that Alaric might notice something, so Giovanni didn't linger and left after bidding them farewell. Upon leaving the tent, André whispered into his ear, Your Highness, even that catastrophe-grade beast was injured in this battle. The 2 mythical knights it fought must be formidable warriors. Giovanni nodded with a grave look. I know. Don't mention this to Alaric for now and make sure that no one will speak of it. Otherwise, he might leave the tent and delay his recovery. Hearing this, Andre lowered his head. Yes, Your Highness. I will inform everyone of your words. After saying this, he left to complete his task. Meanwhile, Giovanni headed to where he had last seen the draconic lion. Soon, he arrived near the fortress's main gate where a large crowd had gathered. His arrival drew everyone's attention and they immediately made way for him. Your Highness! Greetings, Your Highness! Giovanni waved his hand and nodded to acknowledge their greetings. In the middle of the crowd, he saw the draconic lion covered in all sorts of wounds. To a normal beast, the injuries it had accumulated would be fatal. Disperse and do your tasks. Giovanni dismissed the crowd. The soldiers immediately left after hearing his words. They were still slightly afraid of Giovanni. He might have changed drastically, but his past still lingered in everyone's minds. After they left, Giovanni turned his gaze to the healer in charge. How is its condition? The healer, an old man wearing loose robes, was a two-ringed beast soulmaster with integrated traits related to healing. Replying to Your Highness, we have patched up most of its wounds, but the deeper injuries are slightly more difficult to deal with. Given the beast's inherent regenerative abilities, it should fully recover within 2 weeks. With our help, we can lessen the recovery time by half. The healer responded. Giovanni was relieved to hear this. The draconic lion would be crucial to the next battle, so having it fully recovered was their top priority. If you need anything for its recovery, don't hesitate to send someone to inform me, he reminded the old healer. I obey your words, Your Highness. Chapter 374, Ruthless Slaughterer. Inside the tent, Alaric opened the system and a notification popped up in front of him. Do you want to use your random trait card? Yes. No. Alaric pressed yes. You have awakened the SS-Rank Ruthless Slaughterer trait. An SS-Rank trait. Alaric was pleasantly surprised. It sounds strong but also ominous at the same time. Suddenly, a rush of information flooded his mind. Arg. Unlike the previous traits he received, this one brought him an immense headache and an overwhelming sense of nausea. Foreign memories were forcefully integrated into his mind and became his own. Your Highness, are you all right? Your Highness, what's wrong? Hey, doctor, what's going on? Everyone inside the tent panicked when they saw Alaric trembling while clutching his head. Even Galliner couldn't stop himself from worrying. Your Highness! Alaric could hear their words, but the pain he was feeling was so strong that he could barely maintain his sanity. To smooth his rampaging mana, he stimulated his energy core. The stabbing sensation slowly subsided and his breathing soon returned to normal. He opened his eyes and found himself surrounded by a group of people looking at him with great concern. Alaric, what happened? Giovanni asked while inspecting his wounds. He rushed here when he heard that something had happened to Alaric. With a face full of sweat, Alaric forced out a smile. It's nothing. He didn't know how to explain things with so many people around. Giovanni and the medical practitioners asked him more questions. He answered them in a roundabout manner which left Giovanni annoyed. Since he refused to talk, the medical practitioners no longer asked him. Giovanni also left the tent with a dissatisfied expression. Your Highness, if you need anything, just call the servants outside. They will satisfy your every need. All right? Alaric nodded. After another thorough checkup, the medical practitioners left the tent, leaving him and Galliner by themselves. Alaric quickly inspected his stats as soon as they left. Alaric's Silver Sword, Transcendent Knight, EXP, 65, 95/5000, Potential S, Traits, Horseback Riding B, Swordsmanship, SSS, Ruthless Slaughterer, SS, Close Combat, B, Archery, D, Hunting C, Tracking C, Sixth Sense, C, Monster Affinity C, Mana Gathering C, Appraisal B, Strength 300, Stamina 300, Agility 300, Vitality 300, Endurance 300, Mana 305, Battle Points 1,100, 2,600. Stat points: 65, 95. Requirements for the next advancement: 5,000 EXP, 500 in all attributes, and 25,000 battle points. The progress is small. Could have been faster if I hadn't participated in this battle and just focused on doing my daily missions. He thought, but he knew that he couldn't just ignore the situation on the western borders, especially when Harun's attack was most likely related to his birth mother openly ignoring her arranged marriage with their crown prince. If Alaric had chosen to ignore the invasion, his guilt would have gnawed at his heart. Thinking about this, he closed the system with a heavy sigh. The ruthless slaughterer trait is indeed formidable. The more people I kill, the stronger I become. The only downside is that it also brings strong negative emotions that will slowly eat away at my mind. In short, I will become crazier the more I kill. Can I even control this power? The happiness brought upon by awakening an SSS-Rank trait vanished. Meanwhile, in the capital city, Kadera, inside the Crown Prince's private residence, the Crown Prince, Leonard Exler Estania, received Alaric's letter. Exler thought that it was just an update on the situation in the western borders, but when he read the contents of the letter, his expression suddenly changed. Harun, I never thought that they would be this crazy. To think that they would invade our land just because of a woman. I underestimated their crown prince's obsession. Exler stood up and kept the letter in his inner pocket. He then grabbed his coat and left his mansion with great haste. He entered his carriage and said, "Bring me to the imperial palace." The coachman sensed the urgency in his tone, so he didn't dare delay him. "Yes, your highness." Inside the carriage, Exler rubbed his temples. There was another thing in the letter that made him surprised. It was information about Giovanni, detailing the changes in his personality. He had also received reports about this from his spies, but he didn't treat it too seriously. At that time, he thought that Giovanni was merely putting up an act to clear his image. However, Alaric's letter confirmed this to be true. To think that my brother is actually capable of such change. Just what did he experience in the western region? It makes me want to go there myself. Soon, they arrived in front of the imperial castle. Carriages weren't allowed to enter beyond the gates. Even members of the imperial family were subjected to this rule. Exler was escorted by 2 imperial guards towards the imperial castle. Upon entering the castle, Exler headed straight to the imperial library. According to Alaric's letter, he just needed to head to the topmost floor of library and someone would receive the letter for the emperor. Is he talking about Lord Randolph? Or is Lord Dominic on the top floor? Exler could guess what Alaric's plan was, and it made him question whether he had already met with that person. On the second level, he saw an old man leaning on the recliner with sleepy eyes. "Greetings, Lord Randolph." Exler respectfully greeted the old man. He might not look like it, but this old man was a 3-ringed beast soul master. "Oh, your highness, to what do I owe this pleasure?" The old man slowly got up and beamed at him. "I need to go to the top floor to deliver a message." Exler knew that he couldn't force his way up, so he could only hope that this old man wouldn't make things hard for him. Randolph frowned upon hearing this. The smile on his face vanished and was replaced with a grim look. "I apologize, your highness, but I cannot allow you to go there. Lord Randolph, this is an important message. It came from the western borders." Exler didn't give up. Randolph was about to respond when he heard a voice that only he could hear. "Bring him here." Chapter 375, Roger's Fury. Randolph stared deeply at the Crown Prince and said, "Your Highness, please follow me." Hearing the sudden change in his tone, Exler's eyes flashed with profound light. He followed Randolph to the topmost floor. He wanted to ask the old man, but decided not to say anything when he sensed the unusual tenseness of the atmosphere. "We are here." Randolph suddenly stopped. He turned around and looked at the Crown Prince and said, "Someone will come here soon. Please wait here, your highness." After saying this, he lowered his head and left without looking back. Exler felt a wave of unease as soon as the old man left. He felt that someone was staring at him in the dark corners, but no matter where he looked, he failed to detect anyone.
Top, top, top.
Just then, a series of footsteps drifted into his ears. Feeling alarmed, he subconsciously reached out to the hilt of his sword, but then an arm suddenly pressed on his shoulder. "Who?" "Relax, Your Highness," he heard an amused voice behind him. Exler slowly turned his head and saw a man with graying hair who looked to be in his mid-40s. His gaze was penetrating as if no deceit could escape his eyes. Exler's eyes fell on the man's prosthetic right arm that gleamed with metallic light. "Lord Dominic," he cautiously greeted the man. Dominic smiled faintly and motioned to the prince to follow him. "Let's talk somewhere quieter." Exler took a deep breath and followed Dominic. This was the right-hand man of his father, the Emperor. Even to the heirs, Dominic was a mystery. He had rarely revealed himself since he had disappeared from the public's eyes. Dominic pushed a mechanism that was hidden in one of the books.
Gotcha.
A hidden door emerged from behind the bookshelf. Dominic didn't say anything and pushed the door. Creak. Behind the door was a dimly lit passageway. "I know you have a lot of questions, but the time is not yet right." Dominic broke the silence, his voice echoing. Exler opened his mouth and was about to speak when they arrived in front of another door. Dominic opened the door, revealing a small room without any decoration. The only thing inside were a few pieces of furniture and the painting of the current emperor pasted on the wall next to the door. "Take your seat." Dominic gestured for him to sit down while he brewed a pot of tea. "I only have tea here. I hope you don't find it lacking." Dominic chuckled. Exler laughed dryly while looking around the small room, but he soon lost interest since there was nothing to see. A moment later, Dominic poured the freshly brewed tea into a teacup and placed it on the side table. "Please." "Thank you." Exler brought the teacup to his mouth and took a small sip. "Good tea," he praised casually. As the hot tea traveled down his throat, Exler put down the teacup and took out the letter sent by Alaric. "Lord Dominic, I came here to deliver this letter." He put the letter on the side table and pushed towards Dominic. Dominic stared deeply at him and grabbed the letter using his prosthetic hand. While he was reading the letter, Exler took another sip of tea. 5 minutes later, Dominic put down the letter and said, "You have nothing to worry about, Your Highness. I have already sent the Griffin Knights' order to the western borders. They should be there any time now." Hearing this, Exler's eyes lit. "That's great. Thank you, Lord Dominic." He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his chest. Dominic smiled faintly. "Do you still have anything else you want to tell me?" Exler fell into deep thought. He looked at Dominic and asked in a low voice, "How is His Majesty doing?" Dominic didn't respond right away. He poured tea for himself and took a light sip before he replied. "His Majesty told me not to disclose anything about his condition. Please forgive me, Your Highness." "I see." Exler was a bit disappointed, but he didn't press the matter. The two chatted about other matters before Exler excused himself. "The tea was great. I will come and visit you again soon, Lord Dominic." Dominic smiled and nodded his head. "My door is always open for you, Your Highness." After the Crown Prince left, Dominic returned to his seat and revealed a thoughtful smile. "Other than the Griffin Knights' order, that person is also there. I wonder if..." Further away from Ackland Pass was a vast expanse of grasslands. When viewed from above, one could see a military encampment surrounded by earthen walls. This was the base camp of Haroun's troops. At this moment, a gloomy atmosphere loomed over the camp. Everyone expected their victory to be certain, but reality had proven them wrong. "Damn it! That beast almost got me killed." A furious roar echoed from inside the biggest tent which had been erected at the center of the camp. Inside the tent were 3 people covered in bandages. "Please calm down, Lord Dantos." Lemuel forced out a smile. "Old man, how do you expect me to calm down? Can't you see what happened to me?" Dantos was seething with fury. Lemuel stared at Dantos, who had lost an arm, and inwardly cursed him. "Serves you right, you goddamn idiot." "Enough!" A calm voice drifted into their ears. They immediately shut their mouths and glanced at Roger. We failed this time because we weren't aware that the enemy had a catastrophe-grade monster. If we weren't held back by that beast, we would have already taken control of Ackland Pass. Roger spoke in a cold voice. It was obvious that he was expressing his displeasure towards their information department. If they had known that there was a beast at that level in the western borders of Estania, they would have been more cautious in their approach. Bring the head of the information department here at once. He spoke in a tone that didn't allow any refusal. Yes, my lord. Lemuel nodded and left right away. He was afraid that Roger might kill him if he delayed any further. Looking at the expressionless Roger, Dantos didn't dare speak and just sat there in silence. He had seen how this man had wounded the catastrophe-grade beast. Although Roger was also injured, the feat he had done was something he couldn't achieve. Chapter 376. Griffin Knight's Order. The next day in Ackland Pass, everyone gathered outside the fortress to send off the warriors who had fallen in battle. Even Alaric, who hadn't fully recovered, participated in the ceremony. At this moment, a group of clerics from the church was praying for the souls of the deceased. They were reading the sacred texts before the crowd, enveloping everyone in a solemn atmosphere. Soon, a group of warriors lit the bodies of the deceased. Alaric clenched his fists as he watched the roaring flames slowly consume the corpses. We could not even give them a proper burial, he muttered with a heavy sigh. Giovanni, who stood next to him, tapped his shoulder and comforted him. Don't blame yourself. We are at war, and this is the best that we can do for them. Alaric didn't respond. He just nodded his head and closed his eyes to pray for the souls of those who had departed. Aru, please guide the souls of these brave men to your divine kingdom. 2 hours later, the ceremony concluded and everyone dispersed. There were still many things to do, and they didn't even have the time to mourn for the departed soldiers. You should return to the tent. You still haven't recovered. Your wounds might open up if you move around. Giovanni reminded him with a stern look. Alaric shook his head and replied, I will visit Zephyr first. I heard that it was seriously wounded during the battle. Someone told him that Zephyr was injured, so he was worried about its condition. Giovanni sighed. All right, I will take care of the rest here. You should go now. Alaric nodded and left in a hurry. Giovanni pulled his eyes away from him and turned his head toward the soldiers who were busying themselves with their tasks. Suddenly, a warrior approached him and asked hesitantly, Your Highness, what should we do about the corpses of Haroun's soldiers? Giovanni's face darkened upon hearing this. If they were left alone, those corpses would rot and might spread an epidemic. Burn them, he replied coldly. Yes, Your Highness. The warrior nodded and left right away. Alaric went to find Zephyr and found it near the main entrance of the fortress. He saw a group of doctors and healers tending to its injuries. They looked afraid, but they still continued with their tasks. When he arrived, everyone quickly spotted him. Your Highness! Greetings, Your Highness! Alaric smiled faintly and waved his hand. Don't mind me. I only came here to check its condition. You should continue with whatever you were doing. Yes, Your Highness. Zephyr sensed his presence. It opened its eyes and emitted a low growling sound which scared the medical practitioners. Alaric told them not to worry and reassured them that the creature wouldn't hurt them. With his reassurance, the medical practitioners resumed with their tasks.
I'm sorry, Bobby.
You had to fight 2 mythical knights on your own. It must have been tough on you. Alaric stroked the beast's head with a look of guilt. Growl. Zephyr made a sound as if it wanted to complain. Alaric pacified the creature and promised it that he would give it all the meat that it wanted. He stayed with Zephyr for half an hour before he headed to his tent. Along the way, he saw the warriors repairing the broken walls and barracks. They were using the surplus materials from when they built the fortress, but if the fortress were to collapse once more, they would be left with nothing to rebuild it. Just when Alaric was about to head inside his tent, he suddenly sensed something from above. HM? He lifted his head and saw thousands of shadows flying towards them. He squinted his eyes and was pleasantly surprised when he recognized their identity. They are finally here, he mumbled in relief. The warriors also discovered the approaching aerial troops and stopped what they were doing. They are carrying the flag of Estania and the imperial family. Hold on. Those guys are from the Griffin Knights Order. Some of the soldiers brought by Giovanni were from the capital, so they recognized the identity of the visitors based on their banners. Everyone cheered at the arrival of reinforcements. Those who were familiar with the Griffin Knights Order informed everyone about the group. Among the crowd, Redden was the happiest. He had defended the western side of the fortress against Haroun's armored wyvern corps, so he knew how powerful an aerial unit was. During the battle, he had lost more than half of his troops and he too had almost died. Soon, the Griffin Knights Order descended on the fortress. Giovanni and Andre were already there to receive them. "Greetings, Your Highness." The person who led the Griffin Knights Order was an old man dressed in bulky steel armor with a golden cape. Seeing this man, both Giovanni and Andre were startled. Lord Kristin Evander, the commander of the Griffin Knights Order, and the undisputed rank 1 on the Estanian Dragon leaderboard. It was said that he was just a hair's breadth away from reaching the mythical realm. He had never revealed himself ever since he announced to the public that he would focus on his advancement more than 5 years ago. Kristin noticed their unusual gazes and immediately understood what they were thinking. He shook his head and sighed in a regretful tone. Alas, even with a decade of preparation, I still failed to advance. Giovanni and Andre sighed upon hearing this. The fabled mythical realm was truly an unattainable height. Even the renowned warrior like Kristin failed to reach this level. They lamented in their hearts. I am sure you will advance to that realm when the perfect time comes, Lord Kristin. Giovanni consoled the old warrior. Although he had failed, Kristin's power was still undeniably the strongest among the Transcendents. At least that was what he believed. However, the image of another person suddenly popped up in his mind. I wonder who is stronger, Lord Kristin or Sir Galliner. Chapter 377. Ignatius Firecrest. While they were chatting, 2 figures suddenly emerged from the crowd of onlookers. Kristin furrowed his eyebrows, but when he saw who they were, his expression relaxed. Your Highness! Giovanni and Andre also spotted them. Alaric, what are you doing here? You should be resting now. Giovanni spoke in a chiding tone. Alaric chuckled at Giovanni, brushed past him, and stood before Kristin. You must be Lord Kristin, the commander of the Griffin Knights Order. It's a pleasure to meet you, my lord. The pleasure is mine, Your Highness. I have heard a lot about you and it is my wish to meet you in person. Kristin was a man of prominent status, but he wasn't arrogant. He had a gentle temperament, quite unlike William, who was always stern and rigid. They exchanged pleasantries for almost a quarter of an hour before Kristin asked them about the situation. Giovanni and Alaric told him everything that happened. Kristin's expression turned grave the more he listened. He finally understood why Dominic sent that person with them on this trip. While Giovanni and Kristin were chatting, Alaric inspected the members of the Griffin Knights Order. Out of habit, he used his appraisal on each one of them. They are indeed powerful. Most of them are knights, but there are also hundreds of elite knights mixed with them. There are even a few transcendent knights. Suddenly, his eyes fell on one particular person. He wore the same outfit as the rest in the Griffin Knights Order, but Alaric noticed that there was something different about him. Other than the standard spear and bow which all members possessed, he also had a scepter with a glowing red crystal. As if sensing his gaze, the man turned his head and looked at him. Alaric couldn't see the person's face clearly since he was wearing a helmet, but based on his visible facial features, he could tell that it was an old man. Do you want to use appraisal on the selected target? Yes. No. Alaric habitually selected yes. Ignatius Firecrest, 4-ringed Beast Soul Grandmaster EXP. 1055/10,000. Potential S. Integrated monster traits. Fire manipulation S. Flame burst A. Scorching arrows A. Flame immunity A. Traits. Horseback riding S. Spear mastery S. Archery A. Hunting A. Strength 666. Stamina, 529. Agility, 599. Vitality, 612. Endurance, 577. Mana, 819. Alaric was dumbfounded when he saw the man's stats. He is a 4-ringed beast soul grandmaster. To think there is actually someone at this level hidden in the Empire. Alaric quickly retracted his gaze, his heart shaking with excitement. Meanwhile, Ignatius narrowed his eyes. He had a strange feeling that Alaric was able to recognize his power. I might be overthinking it. The plan was not to expose himself in case there were spies hidden in their midst, but he couldn't stop himself from approaching Alaric. The young man had this unusual charisma that could draw people into him. Giovanni, Andre, and Kristen noticed this. Both Andre and Giovanni didn't recognize him, but Kristen knew who he was, so he didn't know what to do. Giovanni was about to come over when Alaric motioned for him to stop. This left him curious about the old man's identity, so he asked Kristen, "Lord Kristen, who is that gentleman?" "Oh, it's just an old member of our Knight's Order," Kristen casually replied, but this was also true. Ignatius was indeed a member of the Griffin Knight's Order. In fact, he was the former commander, but Kristen didn't bother to explain this. Giovanni furrowed his eyebrows. He felt that Kristen was hiding something, but he decided not to inquire further since the old man didn't seem to have the intention of talking about it. Meanwhile, Ignatius invited Alaric to chat with him privately. The latter didn't know the old man's intentions, but he was also curious to know what he wanted to discuss. Alaric excused himself and left with Ignatius. The two headed somewhere quieter. "Do you know me, Your Highness?" Ignatius asked while staring deeply at Alaric. Alaric shook his head. "I don't recognize you, my lord. However, I can vaguely sense your strength. If I'm not wrong, you are either a mythical knight or a 4-ringed beast soul grandmaster." Alaric didn't want anyone to find out about his appraisal trait, so he answered ambiguously. Hearing this, Ignatius squinted his eyes and chuckled. "Not bad. You have discerning eyes. Even Andre wasn't able to sense my strength." While saying those words, he removed his helmet, revealing a face wrinkled with age. Based on his appearance, he looked like someone in his late 60s, but Alaric knew that he was a lot older than that. "My name is Ignatius Firecrest. I am a 4-ringed beast soul grandmaster. It's an honor to meet your highness." The old man smiled faintly. Alaric put on a look of surprise. He hurriedly bowed to the old man and said, "The honor is mine, Lord Ignatius." The old man quickly grabbed his shoulder and reminded him, "Please don't inform anyone about my identity, Your Highness. Not even the people around you. There might be spies in our midst, so we should be careful." "I see. I was thoughtless. Please forgive me, my lord." Alaric apologized. He understood the old man's worries. If someone were to discover that they had a 4-ringed beast soul master, Harun would definitely be more cautious. They might even ask for more support. "It's all right." Ignatius didn't blame him and just chuckled. "By the way, I saw a draconic lion at the catastrophe grade, and I heard that it is your tamed beast." The old man revealed a look of interest when he mentioned this. Catastrophe grade monsters possessed incredible wisdom, and they were extremely fierce by nature, making them impossible to tame. He found it shocking that a beast at this level was willing to follow Alaric, who was only a transcendent knight. Alaric could tell that the old man was only genuinely curious, so he was secretly relieved. "I was only lucky enough to stumble upon it when it was injured. We developed a strong bond since that encounter, and it decided to follow me." Alaric randomly bullshitted without shame. Chapter 378. Forestania. Hearing his explanation, Ignatius sighed with emotion. "You were lucky. Most catastrophe-grade beasts are prideful creatures, so they wouldn't willingly follow someone. You must treasure it well." Alaric nodded. "Yes, my lord." The two chatted for the next 10 minutes before Ignatius excused himself. "Let's chat another time, Your Highness. The others might be suspicious if we disappear for too long." Alaric agreed with him, so he didn't stop the old man from leaving. "All right. If you need anything, Don't hesitate to tell me, my lord. Ignatius nodded and left after putting on his helmet. Looking at his vigorous and solid gait, no one would be able to tell that he was an old man. With Lord Ignatius' support, we can thin out Harun's troops and catch them by surprise. But we must come up with a perfect strategy to deal more damage to enemy troops. Without a proper plan, the enemies might retreat and call for support. A prolonged battle wouldn't be ideal for Astania since there were still other neighboring nations covetously eyeing their lands. For instance, the Empire of Veronica in the south. Before Liam was killed by a mysterious curse-type ability, he mentioned something about Veronica. Unfortunately, he was killed before he could tell them anything. To this day, they still haven't found the person who killed Liam. It seemed like they had disappeared. Alaric shook off his random thoughts and headed back to his tent to get some rest. More than a week had passed since the battle in Ackland Pass, but the enemy troops didn't seem to have the intention of attacking them for the time being. Everyone in the fortress felt uneasy as the days passed. They felt that the enemy was only gathering more troops. On the other hand, they still hadn't fully repaired the damage to the fortress. There were still many things to restore, and even their troops weren't ready for another battle. The only good news was that more reinforcements had arrived. Their initial troop count of about 120,000 went up to over 170,000. However, even with the increase in their numbers, everyone was still worried about the upcoming battle. At this moment, Alaric gathered all the military officers in the fortress to deepen their bond. They had different affiliations, so it was necessary to establish teamwork with each other. Otherwise, they would be like a pile of loose sand that would quickly fall apart at the slightest disturbance. There had been minor disputes between our warriors. Although there had been no reports of deaths, the number of conflicts had increased. If we don't do something about this, it is only a matter before someone gets killed, Alaric said with a serious expression. The atmosphere in the fortress was tense, so the soldiers' state of mind was unstable. Because of this, conflict would arise between different factions, which would sometimes lead to a fistfight or even a brawl. Your Highness, I will warn our troops to be more understanding and more careful in their actions. Someone spoke up. Your Highness, how about we hold joint trainings to establish a deeper connection between our troops? Another one suggested, his words gaining everyone's approval. If they trained together, their teamwork would be more solid. The soldiers would also be able to familiarize themselves with the other groups. What do you think, everyone? Do you agree with this suggestion? Alaric scanned the faces of the people present. Most of them nodded their heads, while the others simply remained silent. Finally, after a thorough discussion, Alaric and Giovanni approved the proposal. They tacitly agreed to let Kristen Evander oversee the joint training. With his presence and his status, no one would dare to cause any trouble. Soon, the joint training of the troops began. The days passed in the blink of an eye and another week went by. Harun's troops didn't show up, so the joint training continued without pause. With the efforts of Kristen and the military officers, the army became more solid than it was before. On the 18th day since the battle in Ackland Pass, Harun's troops finally appeared. Sound the horns. The enemies are coming. Get your equipment and weapons. Everyone, to your stations. The military officers barked out, issuing orders to their troops. The soldiers moved in an orderly manner, showing the results of their training. Everyone moved to their respective positions and waited for further command. At this moment, Alaric wore his armor and stepped out of his tent. "Bring me a horse," he shouted. A moment later, a warrior brought him a disaster-grade war horse which had been prepared for him. For this battle, he would be leading the cavalrymen together with Galliner. Giovanni would stay at the fortress to take command, while Andre would lead the infantrymen. As for Kristen and the Griffin Knight's order, they would wait for Giovanni's command. They had already discussed their battle strategy, so everyone knew where to go. Brum! The sound of the war horns echoed across the mountain pass, making everyone feel nervous. Artillery units, load the boulders and wait for my signal. Giovanni's voice echoed at the main gates of the fortress. Archers, get ready. In the next moment, the collective roaring of the enemies echoed from beneath the mountains. It has begun, Alaric muttered with a grim look. He put on his helmet and turned his head to the cavalrymen. He could sense their unease. Everyone, listen up, he shouted, his words gathering everyone's attention. Sensing their gazes on him, Alaric continued. The enemies are approaching, and we are the only ones who can stop them from invading our lands. If we fall here, the western region will be taken away from us. Our families, friends, and neighbors would be enslaved. To stop that from happening, we must emerge victorious. As soon as his words fell, everyone felt their blood pumping with vigor. Alaric noticed the change in their eyes, and he took the chance to increase their morale. He raised his fist and roared. For Astania, Chapter 379, Marco Harold defends the eastern walls. Harun's advance signaled the start of the second battle in Ackland Pass. The fortress's trebuchets released massive boulders that caught fire upon taking flight and fell upon Harun's troops like meteorites. Boom! 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 The soldiers within the blast radius of the boulders were struck by the sharp debris and were instantly killed. The ones who had survived were grievously wounded, screaming as they crawled through the rubble. Hundreds of others caught fire and were slowly engulfed by fearsome flames, dying agonizing deaths that chilled the hearts of the onlookers. However, even after their comrades died, Harun continued to advance. Hundreds of thousands of warriors rushed towards the fortress from different directions. The roars of the warriors and the constant explosions caused by the artillery projectiles echoed across the mountain pass. It was total chaos. Both sides tacitly agreed not to send their most dominant force into action. It was as if they had already decided to let their armies clash and test each other's strength. At this moment, Giovanni, who was atop the walls of the main gates, noticed that something was amiss. Strange. Why does it seem like there are fewer soldiers here? He frowned as he observed the approaching enemy beneath the mountain. According to Alaric, in the last battle, Harun had concentrated their troops towards the main route which directly faced the main gates of the fortress. However, the number of enemy troops in the main route at this moment was below 100,000. A bad feeling rose in his heart. They are focusing their attacks on another side of the fortress. Thinking about this, Giovanni immediately called 3 members of the Griffin Knights in order to check the other 3 sides of the fortress. After sending the Griffin Knights, Giovanni frowned. His eyes flashed with worry. Should I send Zephyr now? He mumbled, but he quickly discarded the idea. The catastrophe-grade beast was their main combat force, and sending it soon would trigger Harun to send their mythical knights. Although it was strong, it wasn't omnipotent. In the last battle, it was even injured. Giovanni didn't want to take such risks. While he was waiting for the Griffin Knights' reports, the situation on the eastern side of the fortress was becoming increasingly chaotic. The enemies they faced numbered almost 200,000. It was an amount that was more than 10 times their own. Against such overwhelming numerical disadvantage, the defenders on the eastern side of the fortress panicked. Only a few managed to remain calm, and one of them was their appointed commander, the Western Sword Marquis Marco Harold. He had come to Ackland Pass after recovering his wounds. With his strength and his status, he was quickly appointed as the commander of the eastern garrison. Grim-faced, Marco eyed the approaching enemy troops. They also had trebuchets and ballistas, but against 200,000 warriors, they couldn't even slow down their advance. Archers, knock your arrows, he shouted while gesturing with his arm. Upon hearing his words, the archers took aim and knocked their arrows. The enemies would soon enter their range. Marco was waiting for this exact moment. Release, he shouted as soon as the enemies stepped within their range.
Su.
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 Thousands of arrows appeared in the sky, looking like a large flock of migratory birds. In the next moment, they plunged into the ground and struck the enemy troops, turning them into bloody sieves. The dying screams of the soldiers echoed like a tune of death, making Harun's troops flustered. Shield bearers, forward. Raise your shields and protect the siege units. A familiar voice suddenly drifted into their ears. It was their strategist Lemuel. This old man held the highest rank in their army, excluding the 2 mythical knights. His presence calmed their restless hearts. Meanwhile, atop the eastern walls of the fortress, Marco suddenly sensed an aura approaching him. He turned his head, his eyebrows furrowed. That is a griffin knight. Marco quickly spotted the large griffin. What is the situation here, my lord? The griffin knight asked the moment he descended upon the eastern wall. Hearing this, Marco immediately told him the truth. The griffin knight's face turned grave. Please buy as much time as possible. I will report the situation to His Highness and request reinforcements. All right, make it quick. We won't be able to hold them for long.
Marco nodded.
The griffin knight didn't linger and left in haste. After he left, Marco turned his head towards the enemy troops. They had already stepped into the first layer of their traps, which consisted of several deep pitfalls with sharp blades at the bottom. The pitfalls killed hundreds of warriors. Most of them died from asphyxiation. My lord, they are about to cross the second layer of traps, a warrior reported with a grave look.
Marco nodded.
It was about time for him to step onto the battlefield. He jumped off the wall and climbed onto his horse. He then put on his helmet and looked at the gathered cavalrymen and infantrymen. A total of 10,000 warriors, a negligible amount compared to the number of enemy troops. Soldiers, prepare to charge with me, Marco shouted as he unsheathed his swords. Everyone took a deep breath upon hearing his words. Soon, the eastern gate was lifted. Seeing this, Marco raised one of his swords and bellowed, "Charge!" He squeezed his legs, and his horse quickly galloped forward. The cavalrymen and infantrymen immediately followed, roaring at the top of their lungs. At this moment, the enemies had already crossed the last layer of traps. With nothing to stop them, they charged towards the fortress with ferocious expressions. The numerous traps killed thousands of their comrades, making them incredibly furious. They wanted nothing more than to tear apart Astania's troops to avenge their dead companions. They want to stop us with a mere 10,000 troops? Lemuel, who was facilitating the attack, sneered when he saw Marco leading 10,000 warriors to block them. Chapter 380, Loras March on. Lemuel thought that the enemies were only putting up a futile resistance, but something unbelievable happened right in front of his eyes. The 10,000 warriors led by Marco stood their ground by using the steep slopes to their advantage. Lemuel felt a sense of déjà vu as he watched this scene. Something similar happened on the first battle in Ackland Pass. He had even almost perished at that time. How come their warriors are so strong? Marco, in particular, was very conspicuous. He was unbeatable. Wherever he went, dozens of warriors would perish. His swords moved like ghosts, undetectable and deadly. It wasn't just him. There were also a few notable warriors following him. Although not as impressive as Marco, they could fight multiple enemies at once. In just a quarter of an hour, thousands of Harun's troops were killed, whereas only a several hundred died on the opposing side. If it weren't for their numerical advantage, they would have already faced failure. This realization made Lemuel's face sink. "Archers, shoot them with your arrows," he shouted, his face cold. Hearing his words, Harun's troops hesitated. "My lord, if we shoot them, we might hit our comrades." One of their military officers hesitated. Lemuel glared at him. "Are you questioning my orders?" The military officer's face darkened as he shook his head. "I wouldn't dare, my lord." "Then do as I say and shoot them down with our arrows," Lemuel barked, his face contorting with anger. The repeated setback made him agitated, and it had unknowingly clouded his judgment. He was so eager to gain merits that he had even resorted to extreme decisions. In the next moment, thousands of arrows blotted the sky and fell upon Marco's troops. Seeing this, Marco was stunned. What are they doing? Are they planning to sacrifice the lives of their men just to eliminate us? "Lift your shields," he shouted to his troops. However, his voice could barely be heard in this chaotic situation. Only those who were near him managed to hear his words. Most were unable to defend themselves on time, causing their bodies to be pierced and leaving numerous bloody wounds. Hundreds were killed immediately, while a few thousand had injuries of varying degrees. Why are you hitting us? Friendly fire. Friendly fire. Many warriors from Harun complained upon seeing the deaths of their companions at the hands of their allies. However, their complaints were met with cold indifference. The barrage of arrows didn't stop, killing more in the process. On the other hand, Marco's troops also faced heavy casualties since they were the main target. Almost a third of them died, while half of the survivors had arrows stuck to their bodies, making them bleed profusely. Insane. Their commander must have gone insane. Marco's expression darkened at the brutal sight. He felt the opposing side's commander was so cruel. He didn't even spare his men. Filled with profound rage, Marco stimulated his energy core and unleashed a concentrated burst of mana to strengthen his physical body. While locking his gaze on a certain target, he then squeezed his legs and urged his horse to rush forward. Lemuel was very noticeable from the enemy formation since he was the only one riding a special mount. Even an idiot would be able to tell that he held significant authority. Marco guessed that this old man was an enemy military officer, so he targeted him. Out of my way! He forced his way into the enemy formation. Harun's troops tried to stop him, but he was like an unstoppable beast. Those who stood in his path were killed with just a few swings of his swords. Marco penetrated the enemy formation, leaving a trail of blood that stretched for almost half a mile. Seeing Marco approaching him, Lemuel felt inexplicably nervous, but he didn't show it on his face. The other party was a transcendent knight just like him, but he could sense the vast difference in their strength. Feeling nervous, Lemuel shouted, "Kill him! Whoever can kill him will receive land from me." Under his command, hundreds of warriors charged towards Marco, roaring excitedly. Marco, who was powered by his energy core, remained fearless in the face of hundreds of enemies. He brandished his swords with terrifying force, killing dozens of men with each strike. No one could get close to him, and those who did had been decapitated. Shit, just how strong is that guy? Lemuel's face was covered with sweat. Marco was getting closer to him, and no one was able to even slow him down. "What have you done, Lord Lemuel?" A furious voice drifted into his ear. Lemuel frowned and turned his head. Approaching him from behind on horseback was a middle-aged man with long curly black hair. He was holding a massive warhammer that was double his size. This man was a transcendent knight just like him. His name was Loras Marchon. He was a former general of Harun known for being overly protective of his soldiers. He had even opposed the imperial family once for the sake of protecting his subordinates. Because of this, Loras was stripped of his military title and was reduced to commoner status. Lemuel was slightly afraid of this man, so he didn't dare to retort. He just looked away and muttered, "Loras, I have no time to argue with you. If you want us to win, then kill that man at once." Loras was seething with anger. Some of the soldiers killed by the barrage of arrows were his men. He took a deep breath to hold back his rage. He then moved his eyes towards Marco. "I will deal with you later," Loras muttered coldly while giving Lemuel a sidelong glance. The old strategist didn't want to look weak in front of his men, so he snorted in response. "Are you the one who ordered to release those arrows?" A chilling voice suddenly echoed. Loras stared deeply at Marco and was about to respond when Lemuel replied, "It was this old man who made the order."